Here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, we've done a lot of talking about this NFL draft class that the Steelers hauled in and how good it is, at least from our draft process. But let's talk about how it's going to help Kenny Pickett be a better NFL quarterback, which is one of the biggest objectives of 2023. I'm your host, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll talk about that and Andy Weidel, assistant GM, speaks at the end of last week about the Steelers picks and how they're operating. All that and more right here on today's episode. It's a Monday. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy this video on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. So let's get into what I'm talking about here. And I have several layers to this conversation about the draft and how it relates to Kenny Pickett and getting Kenny Pickett to be the Kenny Pickett that they drafted him to be. And this is still a very early step in his process. But one of the things that we noted last year about Kenny Pickett was how limited he was in not throwing the ball deep down the field. Now, we know Kenny Pickett doesn't have the biggest cannon of an arm, but he does have an accurate arm. He can get the ball to the right spots. We've seen him do it in college. We've seen him do it a little bit in the pros, and he got sharper as the year went on. But one of the big things that never materialized for Kenny Pickett, and that will need to materialize at some point, are more efficiency in the deep passing game. And let's look at the numbers just to compare that, just to show you. Now, last year for the Steelers, he completed 7 of 11 deep balls down the middle part of the field. Now, a deep ball is when the ball travels 20 yards or more, and that was where he was most efficient. He completed 7 of 11 throws there for 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and had a passer rating of 108.9. But you look everywhere else, 5 of 15 to the right, 6 of 21 to the left. 4 interceptions between those and only 1 touchdown. Not a good look there overall on his deep passing. And when you look overall at his deep passing numbers, when you combine them all, he completes only 38.3% of his deep passing. And again, these are passes where he targets a receiver or a tight end or somebody that is at least 20 yards downfield. And his yards per attempt average there was 10.1, only getting 477 yards out of 47 attempts. He also threw 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Now, you may think, well, that's just like there are people out there who doubt Kenny Pickett, and they may think, oh, well, he's just a bad quarterback. Well, in college, it looked a little bit different. And yes, college and the NFL, there's a big difference, but this wasn't who he was for Pitt in college. Let's look at the numbers that he had for Pitt in college, and you'll see a difference here. Now, switching this over, and I've been showing videos on YouTube, but I'll read them out for our listeners, where we were talking about down that deep middle part of the field, where it was a little bit better of the numbers with the Steelers, 7 of 11 for 3 touchdowns and an interception. In college, in that same area, at least in his last year with the Panthers, he was 26 of 38, not 7 of 11. He had 917 yards, 14 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, not 3 touchdowns to 1 interception. He was much more efficient, and even in the left and right areas deep down the field, he wasn't lighting it up crazy out there, but he still had better numbers. And when you look at it overall with Pitt, again, we're looking at the numbers here. He goes to 51.4% completion rate. That's more than half of his deep balls being completed in college for almost 1,300 yards. That's almost basically 2/3% better than his pro numbers in his rookie season. And he completed 17 touchdowns and 5 interceptions on those type of deep balls. Now, again, this is the NFL. Part of that is coverage is better athletes, more complex schemes. It happens. But part of it, I think, was also by the design, because the Steelers were trying to protect Kenny Pickett, not just from hits, but also from protecting the team and protecting himself, because the Steelers knew their offensive line wasn't top notch. I mean, they knew that it was going to put them at risk at times. And part of the answer there was to get a better pocket. And how do they get a better pocket? Well, looking at the numbers from last year, Pitt's offensive line allowed 21 sacks, and 11 of those sacks came from the left side of the line. And 7 of those 11 of those sacks came from Dan Moore Jr. And the other 4, of course, came from Kevin Dotson. You look at those numbers and you say, man, those must be the positions that they're going to have to fill. And who are some of the players they went out and got this year? They went out and got Nate Herbig and Isaac Seumalo, giving them 2 options on the interior offensive line to figure out who's going to be the best pass protector for Kenny Pickett at the left guard position if Kevin Dotson isn't up to the task in training camp against those guys. Then, of course, they draft Broderick Jones, who immediately you think is going to be slotting in to left tackle. And those are things that I think are going to be major moves to give Kenny Pickett a better pocket. Now, let's talk about just how serious this is and how much this does impact Kenny Pickett's chances to maybe have not just more deep throws, but better chances at deeper throws, because those deeper passes open up everything. When you have that deep passing attack, it opens up your short passing game. It opens up your run game. But in vice versa, the success of the other parts of the game also open that up. So it's a balance that the Steelers really haven't had for quite some time on the roster or in their offense. And I think that that's something that has to be addressed. And this was why they went and got Broderick Jones. This is why they went and got Isaac Seumalo. This is why they've been fortifying their offensive line. And even Darnell Washington plays into this, and we'll get into that in a minute. But you looking at how all of this plays together. The whole point of protecting Kenny Pickett, you want to protect him, you want to protect his health wise, from getting hit, because he took some big hits. And as we talked about on the show, if he keeps taking hits like he did his rookie year, it's going to be a shorter career than anyone wants. But you're also protecting the team last year from turnovers. And part of this was also the Steelers adjusted their game plans so that he didn't have as many opportunities to throw deeper passes, because they were trying to protect him because they knew their offensive line wasn't going to hold up as much. For example, if you go and look on Pro Football Focus right now and you look at passing pressure and you look up quarterbacks that had at least, I think it was like 50 dropbacks under pressure or 100 dropbacks under pressure or something like that. And it was basically most of the starters in the NFL. The Steelers, both of their quarterbacks they used last year, we're in the top 15 as far as quarterbacks that weren't under pressure as much. Mitch Trubisky was under pressure 29.2% of the time. That was eighth. That was the 8th lowest rate of the quarterbacks when you start filtering out some of the backups who only play a game or two. Kenny Pickett was 31.5%. That's 15th lowest as far as the rate of the amount of times the percentage of which they were under pressure when they dropped back in the NFL. But that doesn't mean that the offensive line was giving them all the time in the world. It just means they were getting the ball out quick because they knew that was their game. Protect the quarterback, protect the football, don't turn the ball over, hope that you grind games out and let the defense win games. And if the Steelers are taking us take a step forward this year, that needs to be part of what changes. And to further confirm what we're talking about here and how that correlates with the percentage of times they weren't under pressure versus they were under pressure, and how it relates to their game plan that they weren't trying to throw the ball deep. Go back and look at players who the average depth of target for players who were attempting deep passes last year. You considered every quarterback who at least took 20 deep passes last year. Again, those are on Pro Football Focus. Those are quarterbacks who threw a ball that traveled 20 yards in the air or more. So if they did that at least 20 times last year, which according to Pro Football Focus, there were 36 of such quarterbacks, Kenny Pickett's average depth of target, which means the average, how far receivers were when he targeted them on a deep ball, it was the 35th lowest. That means there were 34 quarterbacks higher. He was next to last. The only quarterback that had a lower average depth of target on deep passes in the NFL than him last year was Brock Purdy. And again, that's not saying that Kenny Pickett can't do it, because he can. But the Steelers were protecting him. And if you look at also the average, the yards per attempt rate that Kenny Pickett had of the same group of quarterbacks, he averaged 10.1 yards per attempt. That was tied with Andy Dalton at 29th. Now, to be fair, it also was tied with Aaron Rodgers at 29th, but it was also arguably one of Aaron Rodgers' not happiest seasons, which is why he's with the New York Jets now. But the Steelers don't want Kenny Pickett to live with those numbers. They want those things to change, and they want the offense to be more efficient. And part of this all feeds back to fortifying the offensive line, being more physical and opening up opportunities so that Kenny Pickett can take more deep shots. We're going to get more into how this all plays together and what I think needs to be a season that changes the tide of how the Steelers passing game works and why it still is much predicated on the offensive line running the football and finding a real balance on offense that the Steelers haven't had for quite some time. We'll talk about all that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. But first, before we go anywhere else, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at Built Bar. Built Bar is, of course, the #1 protein bar in America. You have to go get a Built Bar right now because they're amazing. They taste great, and they're healthy for you. They give you so many different flavors. They have flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, so many flavors out there. And all Built Bars are come covered in 100% chocolate. That's over every single Built Bar out there is the 100% chocolate, and you get all these different flavors. And you're thinking you're getting all these flavors and you're getting this chocolate. You got to be taking on these calories. Well, you won't be. Built Bars are only 130 calories. They only pack 4 grams of sugar, but somehow they fit 17 grams of protein. So you're getting your gains of your protein without the excess of the fat and the calories and everything else that's going to mess you up that you don't want in your diet. So go get some Built Bars right now. You can go to Built.com anytime and order them right to your door, or you can go to your local Sam's Club and Walmart. That's right. Head to your local Walmart today. You can go to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built Bars. They have 4-bar boxes of flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, and coconut puffs. You can also go to Sam's Club, grab 13-bar boxes with hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. Trust me, when you try Built Bars, you'll thank me later because you'll be trying the best protein bar in America. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Before we continue here, I want to make a quick note here because if you're watching on YouTube, you're probably seeing a new icon that's in the bottom, I guess, right hand of your screen if you're watching this. And if you're listening on audio, please just hear me out because I'd like you to be able to help me out with the campaign we got going here. Now, I joined this campaign, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. We're raising money to help find a cure for cystic fibrosis in an important fight to help tens of thousands of people out there that still suffer from this disease that impacts their lives and shortens their lives every day. If you want to help out, all we're asking is to donate to a campaign that I've started. You can use the QR code on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. Just put your phone up to it. If you're watching on your computer, use that QR code. It'll take you to my campaign page. Any donation would be great. And there's also a link there that you can look at. If you type in the URL finest.cff.org/PGH50 finest/Carter Critiques, that'll take you right to my page as well. You can also just find the link in the YouTube description as well as the audio description. But I also have this offer for you out here if you would like to help and also contribute to the show a little bit more. We've always had our phone lines open, and we will continue to have our phone lines open where you can call in, leave a question that gets answered on the show. That's 412-223-6644. We just ask that you leave your name and where you're from, and we'll try to get your question answered on the show. Now, the thing is that there are a lot of you who call. So I can't always promise that every call will get answered all the time. Well, I'm going to offer you the chance to take advantage of a promise to get your call answered on the show in some way, shape, or form with me answering your call if you do 2 things. 1, leave your phone call on the number 412-223-6644. You do that. And if you donate to this campaign that's raising money to help fight cystic fibrosis, just $10 or more, you can do more if you want, but all I'm asking for is $10. And in the donation slot, just leave your name, where you're from, so that I know that that's you, and make sure that I know that that's you that's donating there, and you leave your voicemail. I guarantee you, if you do both, leaving a voicemail and a donation, I will take your call on the show within a week of you calling. So for many of you who've called, and sometimes I can't get to your question because I have so much content that we're getting to on here, I'm sorry that I can't get to you, but if you do that, I promise you I'll get you on. You can still call for free at any point in time, and I will still address your questions if I can get time in the show. And if I don't get you during the week, I will do bonus episodes where if so many of you all are lining up calls and lining up donations to go with those calls, I will answer you. I will do more episodes of Locked On Steelers where I answer your questions specifically on this show because I want to honor anyone who donates to this campaign and wants their questions asked and associated with it. So just a note there, Thank you for everyone who contributes. Thank you for anyone who does anything there. And thank you to everyone who checks out this show. But let's get back to the point at hand here and what my whole point about Kenny Pickett and what the Steelers need to be doing for him in this upcoming season. We've talked about how if you look at the average depth of target, if you look at the yards per attempt on the deep passes, if you look at everything points to the Steelers were protecting Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky when he was playing from themselves and protecting them from pressure that was going to be there because their offensive line couldn't hold up. Now, personally, I think that pressure is going to be lifted a lot because they're going to trust this offensive line more. Maybe not initially right away in the season, but they're going to see when these guys come to training camp and probably the first couple games, the offensive line is probably going to be a lot more cohesive. They were more cohesive at the end of the season. We saw them block better both in the run game and the pass game, and that opened up opportunities for the Steelers to make more plays. But now they're going to have even better offensive linemen. Seumalo is going to be somewhere on that offensive line, we think left guard. Broderick Jones, a first-round pick. There wasn't a first-round pick on this offensive line. There hasn't been one since David DeCastro and Marquise Pouncey left. And that's going to be huge for doing what Kenny Pickett needs to do and to be comfortable in the pocket, trust that he can be comfortable in the pocket, make throws down the field, and be efficient with the offense. And this isn't going to become, again, I still see the Steelers being a team that runs the ball, that's more physical. We'll get to that with Andy Weidl's comments in a bit here on today's episode. But a key factor I have here for Kenny Pickett here is having that balance in trying to and being able to hit the deep ball because he could trust his offensive line, but also trusting that his offensive line is going to bully people at the line of scrimmage to open up the run game. We've talked about this a lot and how I think the Steelers, they're adopting this identity. They want to be more physical again. They want to dominate the line of scrimmage. They want to be able to run the football. And where some people might say, well, that's not the way to go because look at all these teams that are throwing the ball all the time. And look at how they're playing. Not everybody's playing that way. If you have Patrick Mahomes, great. If you have Josh Allen, awesome. But right now, the Steelers don't have those quarterbacks. Maybe Kenny Pickett turns into a franchise quarterback like that, and maybe someday that's there. But that's not right now. He's a young quarterback who's developing, and they want to kind of have him continue a natural growth with the Steelers, who gets sharper in the offense and then can take command and maybe air it out a little bit later in his career. But right now, have the stronger offensive line. Run the ball. Bully people off the offensive line. When you run the ball more successfully, then those safeties and linebackers, they bite up a little bit more and they open up the deep passes. And also, when you're running the ball more successfully, you're getting 2nd and 5s, 3rd and 2s a lot more often. And when you're in those situations, pass rushers can't pin their ears back the way that they have lately against the Pittsburgh Steelers because the Steelers didn't have a run game. Again, we brought this up at the end of last week. In 2020, the Steelers had the worst rushing offense in the NFL. And so they went and got Najee Harris in 2021 and 2022. And whereas he helped, the move wasn't complete because they didn't have the offensive line yet to block for him to make it a dominant running team. And so now you need this offensive line and Najee Harris to both be clicking at the same time to make that happen. And at the same time, you need the balance of Kenny Pickett to be efficient with passing the ball to put defenses in guessing games. If Matt Canada is to keep his job, he's got to help find a way to coordinate and make this click somehow. But the bottom line is still going to come down to winning at the line of scrimmage, opening things up with the run game, and getting Kenny Pickett to be able to trust his offensive line, target passes downfield, and create that success. Have better numbers when it comes to his average depth of target on deep balls, better yards per attempt on deep balls, and that will put defenses in more guessing games and allow the Steelers offense to be a more efficient unit. And again, how do they do that? Well, Andy Weidl, assistant GM, who assembled the Steelers big board that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin were working with in the NFL draft, he spoke on Friday. We'll speak about his comments here on the Locked On Steelers podcast in just a minute here, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more talk about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here on Monday, getting your week started. Rookie camp is coming later this week, and we'll get to talking about that. But before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about what happened at the end of last week, and that was Andy Weidel, assistant GM, speaking to the Pittsburgh media. Now, Andy Weidel very much trumpeted the very things that I've been talking about and that a lot of us have been talking about the Steelers and the identity that they want to be. Quote from him at the facility, he says, quote, "We want to be big. We want to be physical. We want to be tough. We want to impose our will on teams. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers. You go break the other team's sword in the second half. You go win on the road. That's what we're building. That's what we have here. That's what we've been in the past. We want to continue that identity. It works in this business, and that's physical, tough, smart players, strategic thinkers that you can take on the road, guys who can feel good about being on your bus, going to the stadium, and that's what we're going to continue to add to the team." And he talked more about how the board fell and everything like that. But the bottom line is that he wants to see this team be more physical. And if you're thinking, there's people out there that I read the YouTube comments, I see some people on Twitter and how they think, and like, well, wait a second, Chris, again, how does this make sense? The rest of the NFL, they're throwing all the time. And if the Steelers are running all the time, that's going to be a bad thing. Well, I say this to the person who says that. One, they're not going to run all the time. Again, they're trying to open up the game for Kenny Pickett, but they need to at least have a bread and butter on the ground. They need to at least dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, because that's still an important facet of how they're going to win. And I think a very adept comparison would be to how the Steelers won their last two Super Bowls. Now, granted, that was some time ago. In 2 years, it'll be 20 years since Super Bowl 40. And it's 15 years since Super Bowl 43. So yeah, it's been some time. And you could say that things are a bit different from then. But back then, there were also high talented quarterbacks in supreme throwing offenses that everyone was like, that's the future of the NFL. That's what you have to be. And you can't win without those quarterbacks. Oh, don't remember them? Guess what? They were Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. Let's just name them down the line. They were just a whole bunch of quarterbacks that were like that. Not a whole bunch, but a top tier that everyone considered that was what you had to win with. And you weren't going to win unless you had one of those types of guys. The Steelers had won 2 Super Bowls without those types of guys. Now, Ben Roethlisberger is a Hall of Fame quarterback, but we all know he wasn't a Hall of Fame quarterback the way that Peyton Manning or Tom Brady were. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback because he was tough, because he was gritty, because he could play in that style of offense that we're talking about with the Steelers. If you don't believe me, go back and look at when they won the Super Bowl in 2005. Ben Roethlisberger had maybe his not even maybe his the 3 playoff games that he played in leading up to the Super Bowl before he was terrible in the Super Bowl. He was the best playoff Ben Roethlisberger I had seen. He was confident. He was aggressive. He did those things until the Super Bowl. Then he was terrible there. But a lot of this throughout the entire year was built off of the run game. The Steelers ranked 24th in passing, but they ranked 5th in rushing in 2005. And in 2008, they still ranked 20th overall in offense. They still ranked 17th in passing. They got a little bit better, but still weren't in the upper echelon of the league. And again, this was still in a league where Peyton Manning was a thing, and other offenses were peaking up here and there. But the Steelers staying true to their code. They were great on defense. They ran the ball. They found ways to win. And Ben Roethlisberger wasn't the most efficient all the time. Well, no, I wouldn't say the most efficient. He didn't put up the biggest numbers all the time, but he did find ways to win in big moments. And I think that's what they're hoping Kenny Pickett can find a way to do. And we saw it several times last year when we were looking at Kenny Pickett and how he was finishing, because he was finding a way to finish games. I mean, you look back at how the Steelers won against the Ravens. Game-winning touchdown pass to Najee Harris. And I mean, just last year, he had 4 game-winning drives, 3 of them being fourth quarter comebacks. The Saints, the Colts, the Raiders, and the Ravens. And granted, all low-scoring affairs, but again, that's what the Steelers were doing in the 2000s. Now, again, that Steelers team was also a little bit different. The 2005 team had a better offensive line. They still had Alan Faneca, Jeff Hardings, Marvell Smith, an offensive line that was kicking butt. They had a run game that was just pulverizing you, whether it was Jerome Bettis, Deuce Staley, or Willie Parker. A rookie Heath Miller, a Hines Ward who could kind of carry the receiver room with Antoine Randall and guys like that. But again, that's not an offense. That's not like the Bengals where they've dumped a ton of high draft picks and in the top 5, like Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and guys like that, and a whole bunch of money into it. It's not built the same way, but it's built their own way. And again, if you don't think that Andy Weidel knows what he's talking about, go look at the NFC and ask why is everyone excited about the Eagles? Well, because he built them that way, or at least helped build them that way. Howie Roseman is the GM over there, but Andy Weidel played a huge part in building those boards. Those draft boards that they built from were part of his. And he was also talking, he talked about, the effort to get Landon Dickerson, who's an important offensive lineman for the Eagles that they drafted. And, he was a guy, Landon Dickerson, we talked about him on the show years ago when he could have been picked. And one of the questions was, is his knee healthy? Turned out it was. The Eagles took him, and there, he's now part of that offensive line, and that's part of the good things that they were doing. And you could probably say a similar thing as he even did about Darnell Washington, said, hey, we trust our doctors here at the Pittsburgh Steelers. His knee's going to be fine. That's why they took Darnell Washington. And maybe Darnell Washington and Broderick Jones are part of establishing that identity on offense. Again, I think this all comes back to control the offensive line, and everything else goes from there. Old school Steelers football. This doesn't mean that they run every play all the time and that's all that they do. It just means that they're going to try to control the line of scrimmage so that they can run the football when they want, and it puts less pressure on their quarterback, who they don't want to put that much. They don't want to make them Patrick Mahomes. They don't want to make them Josh Allen. They don't want to have them throwing, 50 times a game or even 40 times a game. You want them in that 30 to 35 range at most, probably. Because when you're keeping them on the lower, that means you're controlling the clock more, because you're probably running the ball more efficiently. And you're probably not down as much because you controlled it. And if you control the clock more efficiently, that means you're having your defense be on the field a lot less, which means they're fresher in the fourth quarter, which means that defense that's going to have TJ Watt, that's going to have Cam Hayward, that's going to have Minkah Fitzpatrick, and now we'll have Patrick Peterson and Joey Porter Jr. as well as Alex Highsmith and a number of other guys. They're going to be fresher to make big plays in the big moments and give you bigger wins. I truly think, again, this all goes back to the start of this draft class, to get more physical, to change this identity of this team, to be the team that pushes other people around and not the other way around. All of that plays into the identity that they're going to be, and I think it all still plays into how Kenny Pickett becomes a better NFL quarterback. Because if he has those things on his side, I truly think he does become a better NFL quarterback this year. And it also gives him the confidence to keep taking steps forward. The way we saw him take steps forward at Pitt, we could see him take similar steps forward in the NFL and how he plays his game. We'll have a lot more to talk about that throughout the offseason. Of course, rookie camp is coming up later this week. But before we even get to that, we got to talk to a lot of different guests this week. We got our man Wes Euler returning at some point. We're hoping to have Mike DeFable from The Athletic back on the show. Of course, we'll have Jenna Harner on our Friday episode as well. So stay tuned for all of those. But we're also planning on a special treat for tomorrow as far as our recordings go, because we're having a former NFL tight end himself, Doran Dickerson of 93.7 The Fan. You can hear him on the radio all the time, but he's a former Pitt tight end and an NFL tight end who was part of that Patriots double tight end offense with Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski. I want to ask him about how 12 personnel can help the Steelers in what they're trying to do on offense. We'll get all of his perspective on tomorrow's episode, so look out for that on Tuesday. But as always, you can find the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Find us on your favorite podcasting app, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this channel for all of our daily content. And as always, you can check out the show. If you want to help out this show, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a special shout out at the end of the show. And again, remember, we're doing our new call-in campaign where you can still call in for free and leave your name. Call in 412-223-6644. And if you call in for free, leave your name and where you're from. I'll try to get you on the show. But I guarantee you, if you do call in and do all that thing, and you give me at least a $10 donation, and by the way, 100% of all of the donations to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation goes to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So I encourage you, if you do at least a $10 donation or more, make sure that your name and where you're from is in the description of who's giving the donation. I'll see that. I'll see your voicemail, and I'll get you on the show within a week of your donation to this campaign. So thanks to everyone who's been part of this, and thanks to everyone who wants to take part in the campaign and help out in our fight against cystic fibrosis. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Tuesday, as we bring on former NFL tight end Doran Dickerson on the show. It's going to be a fun one. We'll see you then.